Welcome to worship in the Unitarian Universalist Church of Charlotte. I've shared with some of you here before my experience of going to Mother Emanuel in Charleston for the first time. It was days after the horrific slaughter of their minister and of their members who had gathered to study the Bible and to pray. I went joining hundreds of others to offer with my presence, my sympathy, and support. The constantly simmering specter of white supremacy, woven so tightly into our entire history, had boiled over, and all I knew to do was show up. Not long after I had settled into my balcony seat in that majestic sanctuary and the more than 2-hour service had begun, the choir rose to sing. They did not sing a dirge. They did not sing of their plight. They did not sing of their long, direct experience with acts of violence. They did not sing of being martyrs. They sang of faith. Their deep, abiding, life-altering faith. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Whom shall I fear? Wait on the Lord and be of good courage. Whom shall I fear? Whom shall I fear? Their song was raised up into those mighty rafters, and the congregation reacted with exuberance. That's not our theology. We don't have that belief system to offer, but we can take something from it nonetheless. Paying attention, being deeply aware of injustice need not discourage nor deplete us. Within the context of a caring congregation, we can be mindful and courageous. We can face the reality of injustice and not lose our faith. We can pay attention without bankrupting our hope. We can be concerned and joyful. These relentlessly trying times require spiritual resolve. We come together again today to face the truth and to fortify our faith for the days which yet lie ahead. As we prepare to sing our own kind of song, one about rising up and about not giving up, greet someone around you with the message, be of good courage. Be of good courage.
From Eric Walker Wickstrom, here today in this place and with these people, may we listen so that we can hear, may we hear so that we can feel, may we feel so that we can know, and may we know so that we can change ourselves and this world. May this chalice we light our way. Our first reading is by Claudia Horwitz and Jesse Maceo Vega Frey. We are knocked around by the tumult of our daily lives, battered by the constant barrage of bad news, of overwork and despair. We work more hours than our bodies and psyches can stand. We may deceive ourselves about the very nature of possibility and the openings for change, get stuck in postures of despair and cynicism, or find ourselves caught up in a rigid relationship to time, task, and relationship. More is more. More is better. Long-term vision is sacrificed for immediate and inadequate gains. Opportunities for collaboration become mired in competition. Our anxiety around scarcity and the sense of a world on the verge of collapse disables us and disconnects us from our own internal sources of wisdom, vision, and spaciousness. Spiritual practice builds a reservoir of spaciousness and equanimity that can provide us with access to our deepest capacities in the midst of great turmoil and difficulty, tension, and conflict.
Once more, Denise Levertov's Beginners, because we still need it. But we have only begun to love the earth. We have only begun to imagine the fullness of life. How could we tire of hope? So much is in bud. How can desire fail? We have only begun to imagine justice and mercy, only begun to envision how it might be to live as siblings with beast and flower, not as oppressors. Surely our river cannot already be hastening into the sea of non-being. Surely it cannot drag in the silt all that is innocent. Not yet. Not yet. There is too much broken that must be mended. Too much hurt we have done to each other that cannot yet be forgiven. We have only begun to know the power that is in us if we would join our solitudes in the communion of struggle. So much is unfolding that must complete the gesture. So much. So much is in bud.
Shot
The physicist Richard Feynman once admitted that where the complexities of quantum physics were concerned, I cannot define the real problem. Therefore, I suspect there's no real problem. But I'm not sure there's no real problem. Got that? Among those complexities is something called the observer effect. Put simply, probably overly simply for any of you who may actually understand it, the observer effect states that the act of observing will influence the phenomenon being observed. That is, what occurs in a quantum experiment can change depending on whether or not there is some effort to try to measure some property of the particles that are involved. Defying, or at least calling into question, our basic assumptions that there is an objective world out there that is going to behave in a particular way no matter what. The observer effect suggests that, as one science writer explained it, the way the world behaves depends on how or if we look at it. Just consider that as a scientific statement for just a second. The way the world behaves depends on how or if we look at it. In the social sciences, the observer effect is often known as the Hawthorne effect, originating in a study of factory productivity at Hawthorne Works, a Western electric facility outside of Chicago. The study suggested that the simple act of observing the workers, of conducting the study, had an effect on how they worked. Observation alone can change action. While at the quantum physics level, this is really hard to comprehend, I suppose the premise that observation alone can change behavior is, after all, what is behind a certain creepy caution that he sees you when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake. He knows if you've been bad or good. Now, if the behavior of both photons and factory workers, and perhaps even 5-year-olds, is altered simply by being observed, I've been wondering what the implications might be in other arenas of our lives. In some way, all spiritual traditions commend observing, awareness, mindfulness. John Horgan, former senior writer for Scientific American, includes in his book Rational Mysticism this tale. According to Zen legend, when a visitor asked the 15th century master Ikkyu to write down a maxim of the highest wisdom, Ikkyu wrote one word: attention. The visitor asked irritably, "Is that all?" This time, Ikkyu wrote 2 words: attention. Attention. This Advent season for our Christian neighbors has them hearing again Bach's magnificent cantata, Wachet auf. Awake calls the voices to us. Wake up. Take notice. Now is the time for attentive preparation. It's what Mary Oliver constantly counseled in poetic form, asserting to pay attention. That is our endless and proper work. While some profess to find spirituality as confusing as quantum physics, one way to think about spirituality has to do with intention and attention. Spirituality has to do with being intentional about paying attention, with mindful noticing, with wakeful awareness. The poetically prophetic Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel made a distinction between the stupor of normal consciousness and the endeavor to awake from the drowsiness and apathy and to regain the state of wakefulness. This all suggests that one way to answer the question posed by our theme for this year about what we hold most dear can be found in asking, to what do we give our attention? In the age of clickbait, pop-up advertising, and news screens with scrolling headlines, at a time when there is such constant competition for our attention, maybe the better question is, to what do we give intentional attention? What do we hold most dear? That to which we give intentional attention. Writer David White, in a conversation with Krista Tippett, makes this very point. I began to realize, he attests, that my identity depended not upon any beliefs I had, inherited beliefs or manufactured beliefs, but my identity, David White says, my identity actually depended on how much attention I was paying to things that were other than myself. Is there a single one of us in this room today who is unaware of the very high cost of paying attention to things other than ourselves these days? If we choose to notice, if we choose to be aware and informed, what we see and hear and read and learn, what we're forced to face, what we're required to consider, can leave us angry, baffled, concerned, overwhelmed, exhausted, afraid, even despondent and despairing. We need the support of others. We need a supportive spiritual community if we're going to pay attention and keep paying attention. We're now in our third year of very intentional attention to our nation's long history of injustice. Some of you, quite a few of you now have participated in one of our core groups, paying attention to cultural, economic, environmental, and racial injustice and to the ways that they all intersect. Make no mistake, this is spiritual work. Spiritual work of the deepest sort. Marianne Lawler, in an issue of our publication Soundings, posted this past week, explained, I applied to join the Racial Justice Core Group to learn what I can do as an individual and as a part of our UU community to try to end racism and help in dismantling the system of white supremacy. She, like many of us, is choosing the not always easy path of paying attention. And a few months in, she admits with humility, I did not realize how much I did not know. Spirituality for us isn't about belief, about beliefs inherited or manufactured. What we hold most dear is not doctrine or declarations or even self-determination. What we hold most dear includes a serious summons to give attention to, as we name in our principles, to justice, equity, and compassion, to respect for an interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. In our own urgent way, we too, in this liberating faith, sound the cry, wake up, notice, observe, pay attention, observe injustice, notice inequity, pay attention to places where compassion has gone missing. Wake up to the tragic fracturing of the fragile web holding us all in tenuous interdependence. For many of us, especially for those of us for whom noticing things like white supremacy, environmental injustice, mass incarceration in the prison industrial complex, transphobia, have seemingly been optional. Choosing now to give concerted attention can be exhausting. It's not easy to pay attention and to keep paying attention. And so much feels so disturbing, so overwhelming. It's not easy to pay attention and to keep paying attention when we feel powerless to make any real difference. It's not easy to pay attention and to keep paying attention when the seductive tug to turn off, tune out, ignore, and avoid pulls at our psyches. But what happens when we stop noticing? What happens when we no longer pay attention? Who is affected? Who is imperiled? Who is at further risk? If the ones of us who are claiming to hold justice most dear decide that we just can't take it anymore. Perhaps that's why years ago, on one of his visits to Charlotte, the writer and Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel professed, "I've been fighting my entire life for people everywhere to be equal and to be different. But there is one right that I would not grant to anyone. And that is the right to be indifferent." Some of us know Wiesel's equation. The opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. The opposite of art is not ugliness, it's indifference. The opposite of faith is not heresy, it's indifference. The opposite of life is not death, it's indifference. Because of indifference, says Wiesel, one dies before one actually dies. I found myself in a room of people paying attention this past Thursday evening. In fact, they'd come together precisely because they have been paying attention. Members of this congregation, joined by members of a larger community, coming together to reflect on their experiences of court watching. Each week this past fall, some of our members have entered the Mecklenburg County Courthouse, sat in a courtroom, and observed, paid attention. They've been noticing and they've been documenting who actually ends up in a courtroom in this county. Poor people, people of color, black and brown people. They've been observing how those who have been arrested are treated in this system prior to any conviction. They've been gathering data for a deep analysis. Christy Puckett Williams, our partner, the charismatic co-conspirator who trained and led us, has sung the praises of this group in the larger community. She's touted our members' commitment. And she has especially noted our willingness to participate not as those in charge, but as those who have been listening and learning from someone who knows that system all too well. So now comes the question. What is all of this observing doing? What changes just because we sit and take notice? Say the quantum physicists. Remember this? The way the world behaves depends on how or if we look at it. What if the simple fact that some here are paying attention is in and of itself having an effect? What if this system, long marred by historic injustices, by the over-policing, over-arrest, over-incarceration of black and brown and poor people, what if this system is being changed through the observation of those who are now paying attention? What if the attention that some of you will pay to our homeless neighbors in our own building this very evening is making a difference? What if all the other ways we are stepping back to pay attention to aspects of our history long ignored and lied about, and all the other ways we will be stepping up to follow the leadership of co-conspirators in this community is making a difference? You just might be surprised, suggest those quantum physicists. Your observations alone, your choice not to ignore, your choice not to indulge in the safety of indifference may be making the world better already in ways you don't yet see or understand. Paying attention, giving intentional attention to injustice does not demand that we relinquish self-care, give up enjoyment, no longer indulge in occasional escapes. Paying attention, giving intentional attention to injustice does not demand that we stay plugged in, tuned in 24 hours a day. Paying attention, giving intentional attention to injustice doesn't mean we have to care deeply about every single injustice in ways that leave us depleted and discouraged. Paying attention, giving intentional attention to injustice doesn't need to be, should not be, some act of complete altruism, some agonizing sacrifice that taints our days with ever-deepening concern. The people I saw in that room on Thursday evening, the ones who have been staring down the all too evident specter of white supremacy and the all too unavoidable reality of raging injustices in policing and arrests and processing and incarceration, they didn't look miserable. And some of you were in there, you didn't look miserable. There was energy in that room. There was a feeling of belonging in that room. There was a sense of purpose. There was a delight at having found a way to be involved. The call in this season is sounding again. The call to observe. The call to notice. The call to be mindful. The call to pay attention. The call is sounding. Do you hear it?
Welcome. We're happy you're with us in this room today or joining us remotely. We're pleased to have guests with us. Our members would like to greet you personally following the service. So if you are visiting, please raise your hand and keep it up. Members, take note of guests seated near you. After the service, invite them to join you for coffee and conversation in Freeman Hall. Should it enhance your experience of future services, we offer large print orders of service and personal hearing assistance devices on the way into the sanctuary. We have an elevator available, and we provide an alternative worship space for those who may opt for a setting requiring a bit less quiet and stillness. If you'd like to learn more about us, please fill out a yellow card and place it in an offering basket later in the service. Members with a life event to share can do so on the reverse side of the card. The cards and offering envelopes are on the clipboards at the end of the row. Please begin passing them now. Visitors interested in hearing about how to become a member can talk with our membership coordinator, Kelly Green. Her contact information is on the back of your order. Again, to each of you, welcome. It happened again this past Friday night, that lay service leader dream where you come to church and completely forgot to write anything for the service. In it, I attempted to scribble some notes on a page before the opening music so as to look prepared, but the jig was up shortly after. We light this chalice. I turn around for a lifeline from Jay, only to find him shaking his head in disappointment. So I embarrassingly slink back behind the stage and hide for the next 3 hours, Googling new congregations I could join. This often happens to me during waking hours too, in much deeper and more serious ways. My anxiety, leading me through my daily life, pulling me down paths of despair, of what ifs, of how could I's, of why didn't I's. Oftentimes I find myself moving through this world and through justice work, overwhelmed by it all. This sense of being overwhelmed often leads me to procrastination and to paralysis, which can often present itself as indifference. I can't do the wrong thing if I do nothing, right? I've come to realize over the years, through mindfulness and paying attention to when they show up, that my anxieties are rooted in love. Love for my congregation and wanting to do a good job up here. Love for this world, the people in it and in my life, and for the collective vision of the world and what it could be, the bud that Denise Levertov speaks of. Moving with love, moving with compassion and empathy, that's how the work gets done collectively. It's not about me or you. It's definitely not about them. It's about us. When we realize that our shared humanity binds us together across generations, race, and all of the specious ways we create division among ourselves, it becomes harder to be indifferent. It helps to remind myself that the work of justice has been going on for a very long time and will neither slow to a halt or be finished because of any one of my actions, but that I can play a support role to those leading. Noticing is justice work. Paying attention is justice work. I'm so fortunate to have a job that affords me the chance to do good work. I work at a nonprofit entrepreneurs academy that empowers and trains formerly incarcerated people who often face barriers to employment upon release to start their own businesses. My job's mostly administrative, providing support where I can, arranging meeting spaces, things like that. But time and again, they tell me that our seeing them empowers them. And just getting a check-in text message from me reminds them of their importance to at least one person, and it keeps them going. I'm also so fortunate to be a member of this church that reminds me that my actions matter, and that I'm not alone, and that my spirit is nurtured and supported so that I can move through this world and through this work with love and compassion. And that even though it can get overwhelming, I'm in good company.
Neil Sigmund, might you have a word for us, and maybe even a song?
There are lots of songs in my heart. 'Tis the season to be jolly, and so the stewardship team, as will call attention to the Yes campaign. Hark, the herald angels remind you of the value of this church and what it takes to keep it a positive force for its members and for the community beyond these friendly confines. To support our values, the Yes campaign is focused on asking for an 8% increase in your pledge. This would boost the church's income by $60,000 and facilitate the same level of programming and staffing we now have. We are immensely grateful for those of you, the many of you who have responded positively to the 8% increase. Joy to the world. The good reputation of the music program of the UU Church in Arlington, Virginia, was my first exposure to UU values. 30 years later, our move to Charlotte ended our close involvement with that church. And finding the UU Church here was important to us. We feel fortunate to have found this community. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy. If December is your month, your pledge is due today. And if your month is yet to come, you can pledge now even, or wait until that month arrives. Members of our team will be in the fellowship hall after the service. Whatever your situation, we do hope you can say yes to an 8% increase. And for everyone, we wish you a Merry Christmas, we wish you a Merry Christmas, we wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
I've taken note, Neil, that when you accompany your words by singing, you get applause. So beginning next sermon, don't worry. Probably wouldn't get the same reaction. Tonight and every Sunday evening for weeks to come, we'll be hosting Homeless Neighbors. We can always benefit from more of our members being involved. There's information in your order about how to do that. Take note that again this year we will offer 3 services on Christmas Eve, 2 family-friendly services at 3 and 5, and another for our members and for many guests at 7:30 that same evening. Joy and sorrow are forever woven together here in this community of care and compassion. Today we celebrate with great delight, along with Susan Cox, the birth of her grandson. Today flowers in the niche remind us of the celebration of the life of Gaynell Freeman that we held here just yesterday. Today, with the deepest of sorrow, we mourn the death of our beloved member, Bob Bushorn. We join as Bob's beloved community in holding Bob's wife, Lee, his daughters, his grandkids, and his immensely large circle of friends and influence in our prayers. We'll gather again tomorrow to celebrate Bob's life in a memorial service at 5:30 here in the sanctuary. Today, we expand our circle of care and concern beyond these walls to include our larger community our fractured nation, our imperiled planet. Please join me in a time of meditation and aspiration, the opportunity to breathe deeply together. We notice. We also notice the rising and setting of the sun and the moon, the light that dawns from darkness, and the dark that endures at length in this time. The starkly beautiful specter of bare limbs against gray skies. We notice. We also notice those rare and showy plants that blossom, that produce in this season. The birds that did not depart. The wind that susurrates through tall pines. We notice. We also notice that life abounds, that the earth tilts in its turning, that the stars shimmer and shine. And in our noticing, we are grateful. We are grateful. We are so grateful. Amen.
Elie Wiesel posed that the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. The opposite of art is not ugliness, it's indifference. The opposite of faith is not heresy, it's indifference. One could imagine then that the opposite of generosity is not selfishness, but indifference. How will you give differently and generously today? We will now give and receive the offering. Please join me in an affirmation of our faith, rising in body and or spirit. May the strength this time together help us to walk forward. May the wisdom of this experience help us to know our path. May we have the courage to return as often as necessary until our path is clear. May we have the perseverance together to see it through. May we cause it to be so.
Andrew Young, years on the battlefield, decades into his effort to foster justice and equity, spoke that long ago night as we celebrated the 25th anniversary of Houston's Rothko Chapel. He recounted hardships and setbacks. He named the current reality with precision. He laid out the challenges of the days that were ahead. But then, returning to his roots, that eloquent orator reached back into the music that had sustained his soul and declared in a wavering voice, "I don't feel no ways tired. I've come too far from where I started from. And nobody told me that the road was going to be easy. But I don't believe he brought me this far to leave me." Shine on, my friends. Shine on. Please be seated.